Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we have been talking a lot as of recently about China. I just recently did a report on a bank run in Zhejiang City in China, where that's a huge story. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of power shift, a lot of stuff happening with the IMF wanting to move to Beijing. Well, we've talked about the property bubbles in China. There's been a few of them over the last 10 years, to say the least. And something that stood out to me was this story out of Zero Hedge, which says, the nightmare scenario for Beijing. 50 million Chinese apartments are empty. And now this kind of reminds me of all the empty homes in Vancouver that Chinese have bought up, or the ghost cities that we've talked about infamously in the past. Yeah, well, exactly. And this article, I want to get deep into this, and then we'll really explain what's going on here. But bear with me here as I go into this article. As it says, back in 2017, we explained why the fate of the world economy is in the hands of China's housing bubble. The answer was simple. For the Chinese population and growing middle class to keep spending vibrant and borrowing elevated, it had to feel comfortable and confident that its wealth would keep rising. However, unlike the US, where the stock market is the ultimate barometer of the confidence-boosting wealth effect, in China it has always been about housing, as 3/4 of Chinese household assets are parked in real estate, compared to only 28% in the US, with the remainder invested financial assets. Beijing knows this, of course, which is why China periodically and consistently reflates its housing bubble, hoping that the popping of the bubble, which happened in late 2011 and again in 2014, will be controlled. Smooth landing process. For now, Beijing has been successful in maintaining price stability, at least according to official data, allowing the air out of the Tier 1 home price bubble, which peaked in early 2016, while preserving modest home price appreciation in secondary markets. How long China will be able to avoid a sharp price decline remains to be seen. But in the meantime, another problem faces China's housing market. In addition to being the primary source of household net worth and therefore stable and growing consumption, it has also been a key driver behind China's economic growth, with infrastructure spending and capital investment long among the biggest components of the country's goal-seeked GDP. One result has been China's infamous ghost cities, built only for the sake of Keynesian spending to hit a predetermined GDP number that would make Beijing happy. Meanwhile, in the process of reflating the latest housing bubble, another dire byproduct of this artificial housing market has emerged. Tens of millions of apartments and houses standing empty across the country. According to Bloomberg, soon-to-be published research will show that roughly 22% of China's urban housing stock is unoccupied, according to Professor Gan Li, who runs the main nationwide study. That amounts to more than 50 million empty homes. The reason for the massive empty inventory glut: to keep supply low and prices artificially elevated by taking out as much inventory off the market as possible. This, however, works both ways, and while it helps boost prices on the way up as the economy grow and speculators flood the housing market with easy money, the moment the trend flips, the spike in supply as empty units are offloaded will lead to a panic liquidation of homes, resulting in what may be the biggest housing market crash ever observed, and putting the US bubble of 2006 to shame. Indeed, as Bloomberg notes, the nightmare scenario for Chinese authorities is that owners of unoccupied dwellings rush to sell when cracks start appearing in the property market, causing a self-reinforced downward price spiral. Worse, the latest data from a survey in 2017 also suggests Beijing's efforts to curb property speculation, which, alongside shadow banking and the persistent threat of sudden bank runs, like the one discussed last week, is considered by Beijing a key threat to financial and social stability, have failed. There's no other single country with such a high vacancy rate, said Gan of Chengdu's Southern University of Finance and Economics. Should any crack emerge in the property market, the homes to be offloaded will hit China like a flood. How did the Chinese researcher obtain this troubling number? To find the percentage of vacant housing, thousands of researchers spread out across 363 Chinese counties last year as part of the China Household Finance Survey, which Gan runs at the university. Gan said that the vacancy rate, which excludes homes yet to be sold by developers, was little change from a 2013 reading of 22.4%. And while that study showed 49 million vacant homes, Gan put the numbers now at definitely more than 50 million units. So, John, let's go into this. This is crazy. And I mean, we know that China has a massive debt ticking time bomb. We know their debt is sky high. We know that I think it was a household debt that's grown over 40% over the last year or so. I mean, it's crazy. So what say you, John? What do you think about this story?
Well, I think it's a central planned disaster in the first place. That's it's just totally insane. We've been talking about this ghost cities forever, Josh, and just watching it unwind is ridiculous. It's just a bubble of epic proportions, just like their stock market. I'm gonna just pull up a chart here, Josh, to show the people at our channel, to show them actually how bad the Chinese stock market has been ever since the 2008 bubble. It's been always going down. It had a peak up in 2016-ish, and then it's just been going down again. It's continuing down. It's working on, a wave down and sell-off. And the problem is, Josh, when you have such mass amounts of centralized assets and control that China does, and especially these ghost cities, like 50 million, like think about that, 50 million empty homes, Josh. That is over 1.5 of the Canadian population in total. That is an amazing number and very
and think about this, John, for a moment. Just thinking that years ago when we heard about those original ghost cities, I'd hear comments about, well, they've now filled those entire ghost cities. Okay, so they filled those ghost cities and managed to create more, adding up to as many as 50 million vacant units. Now, that's some talent. That is some serious talent, being able to manipulate a market to that extent, but it's incredibly detrimental long term.
Yo, it totally is, Josh. And I just in the Zero Hedge article here under the third home purchases, you can clearly see that it's getting to a point of complete unsustainability. Just look at how many people is owning a third home now. It just baffles me to watch these numbers. And of course, in the first place, it just to see the central planning. And this is the problem with Keynesian economics in the first place, Josh, is trying to push up that GDP number. That GDP number is what they need in order to print more money into the system to pay off the old debt, the old interest and the old debt. Well, they're not even paying down the debt. That's the wrong thing to say. They're trying to pay off the interest. So they're constantly trying to print more and more money. And of course, I did a report on Steemit where I looked into a G30 report of the G30 group, which is a sinister group like Bilderberg, even worse. They had looked into the Chinese banking system, and they found since 2000 to 2015 second quarter, the debt had increased 1,700%, so almost 17 times in just about 15 years. That is an utter and complete insane number. That just shows you what they've been trying to do. Like, they've been trying to get a whole bunch of investors into the country to try to sustain their unsustainable growth. And of course, they propped up their state-owned enterprises tremendously with all of these fake construction projects all around China, that you have these mass amounts of ghost cities and vacant places everywhere, vacant malls. There's so many examples
John,
of all this.
I want to ask, do you think it's possible for them to possibly carefully deflate this bubble again? Because they've actually amazingly managed to get away with a lot of massive bubbles in the past by slowly deflating them and not destroying absolutely everything in its path. But do you think this is possible this time around?
Well, like slowly deflating it. The problem is that they are buying up mass amounts of assets in order to do that. The central bank, public bank of China, has to go in there and buy up and print mass amounts of money on top of that to actually try to counteract the mass defaulting of all the debt in these corporations. Like, think about all the debt that they accumulated, as I said. And then you're looking at just the mass amount. But the interesting thing with China compared to a lot of other emerging market countries is that they almost have no US dollar denominated debt. So they're actually, most of their debt is denominated in Chinese yuan, so they control their markets a little bit more than others. But of course, it comes to a point where the Chinese people say, like, this yuan, it's very similar to the yuan back in the day of the Great Khan when he was ruling the world. That was the Yuan dynasty. They are gonna say enough is enough. The value of the yuan has gone so far down that it's worth garbage. And what's interesting is the Chinese are kind of trying to really desperately try to push up and trying to create this massive empire in order to try to take over for the United States. But they created on the back of a mass epic debt bubble of such proportions that we never have seen this before, Josh.
Yeah.
This bubble is just so completely unsustainable. I'm just utterly baffled by the amount of debt that they printed in such a short period of time.
I want to kind of go into this a little bit, John, because of course, and I'm going to say this piece quickly, all fiat currencies eventually revert to their true value of zero. They always have. They always will, going back to 1024 AD in China. In China, these people have managed to create one of the most coercive, horrible systems on the face of the planet. But now they are really getting an advantageous kind of head start with the centrally planned cashless system that they are unrolling. And I mean, I've been under the belief that China will last longer than the US when the entire domino effect happens, when we see all of the major currencies around the world collapse as the US dollar comes down, and it has to eventually. I've always felt that perhaps China will be able to hang on longer and be able to really master that position of the world reserve currency through their centrally planned cashless system going through the SDR, because people are so subservient to it, because it's so hard to get away from it when you have this system that you can't do runs on the banks really when it's completely digital. There can be bail-ins, you can be completely controlled with the social credit scores, everything like that. Biggest population on the planet, huge guinea pig test ground for this society alongside India and places like Sweden, etc. But I think that this is an example that even when China, or if China manages to surpass the US for several years and manages to flourish above them, all of these systems eventually come down, and they have to. So China, when that debt bubble bursts, when their yuan crashes, when everything comes down, that will be the end of the old guard, in my opinion. That will be the biggest collapse we've ever seen in history after the massive US dollar world reserve currency domino effect worldwide. I believe that this will lead to something better. This will lead to people maybe learning that every fiat currency fails, and even the academic economists finally admitting their mistakes, even though they wouldn't after the past recessions and depressions and everything else that's happened over time. But anyway, John, where do you think this is heading? Because I really do believe that China will be able to survive for a little bit of time after the US world reserve currency crashes, even with the massive amount of debt that they have.
Well, we got to think about it this way. So what's happening in China right now is that they're really trying to get away from the US and being dependent on them for exporting a mass amount of goods to the United States. You got to remember, that's why this whole trade war is kind of getting in the advance of the United States, because the United States is doing such a tremendous amount of trade. So when they put their tariffs on China, they have a bigger advantage than China, because China doesn't buy that much from the United States. So it's a lot harder for the Chinese to actually come in and control and do that. But of course, again, when you look at China, they have been, just developing, and they're starting kind of to turn into a real modern society. So they kind of on the early, mid kind of range of where a society has gone, but they're doing it way more rapidly than we've seen in the United States and elsewhere. Their debt bubble is going faster. I kind of agree with you there, Josh, that you will probably see the United States go first, because that's where everybody wants. Everybody wants the United States to fall because nobody likes the big empire. But again, there's another empire that's lurking under the surface. We talked about this before. Look at our video on the United Nations, the many tentacles of globalism. That is the next thing that's coming, I believe, Josh. And I think there's a lot of people saying that we will see just a multilateral world control kind of mechanism. That could be the way that's happening, where you have a couple of like semi-powers, like the United States will still be around a little bit, and then you have Russia, you have Europe, you have China, a little bit Japan. You have a couple of like semi-powers of nations out there. You could see something like that, but of course the United Nations have a better plan. They want the SDR when all this is coming down, Josh. They want that, to implement that into the world and have the Chinese and everybody. Of course, China got implemented into the SDR basket just a couple of years ago, and now they have been pushing for getting more voting power and more control over the IMF so they could sit on the top compared to the United States, because the United States has veto power. They control all the legislation, everything that's happening there. So there's not as much power for the Chinese and their allies, because the Chinese have very little less power than the United States. So they use the BRICS countries, but if you look at the BRICS countries and their voting power in the IMF, they have way more power. So I think there's so many outcomes that could happen there, Josh. But when you look at what does humanity do over time, they usually get to the point where a totalitarian regime like China has so much control that people are fed up with it. They are ready to stand up for themselves. They're ready to topple the government and then go back to no government usually, and anarchy in some kind of form where there's no real central control anymore. And I think that's where China is heading towards for 100%. Their centralized system is just it's just an amazingly stupid way of trying to control humanity. I did actually recently report that I'm almost done with now on Australia's economy, where I looked at and I wrote in my final words, I think it's just human nature to look for hierarchies, look for being controlled and so on. But it comes to a certain point where they just control the sheep enough, the predators, the psychopaths that are running the countries, that the sheep doesn't like it anymore. They don't like getting slaughtered left, right, and center. They're not like, hey, I don't like this. I don't like all my friends getting slaughtered all the time that I hang out with. So they suddenly are saying like, hey, something might be wrong with this control mechanism that is over us. And then suddenly they just start to revolt. But a lot of times, Josh, throughout history, the revolts doesn't really necessarily revolve around educated people. So you might not get the actual revolution that you want, where you have people getting into and creating, voluntary societies and new ways of getting governed or whatever it is.
Instead, you get Stalin and Mao, and that seems to be some of the biggest revolutions throughout history. It's very unfortunate. But I want to mention, you mentioned kind of the populace's need for dependency. It's kind of like they grow up depending on their parents, and it feels natural to them to depend on something when they grow up, because they don't want to have to, take responsibility over their own life, and freedom in the end is responsibility. You can't have one without the other. But one thing I know for sure is that China is preparing for something. They are preparing for something big. They're stocking up on gold and silver. They're stocking up, telling their citizens to stock up, trying to create a financially long-term insured society, all the while centralizing everything.
And they're propping up their military-industrial complex as well, Josh.
Oh, absolutely. And forming bonds and allies with countries around the world like Russia and of course, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a really big issue, and I think that individuals have to first see the government is organized crime and it's just a big racket to push people into dependence. They are dependent on the dependence of the populace. So when you are shoved down a bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, pushing you into perfect servitude right where they want you. So first, break free from that. Second, educate yourself, understand the world around you, travel, see things, read books, look at different sides of the argument, challenge yourself, do whatever you can, but always look towards you as an individual, not using force against other individuals, seeing that these banks and governments work hand in hand as organized crime rackets to force people into poverty and therefore more dependence and in a circle forever. Individuals must look to food, water, shelter, self-defense so you're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block, gold and silver as wealth insurance, and of course, this isn't investment advice, this is just opinion, but look at the gold and silver aren't even investments. And then, cryptocurrencies that have sound, true, fundamental value. As these massive cashless societies like China and India attack decentralized cryptocurrencies, we must look to these options, because if you could use the blockchain to enslave humanity, and you could use a blockchain if decentralized to overthrow that which enslaves humanity. It's that difference between centralization and decentralization. Remember that, folks. Rule yourselves, be free, don't depend on others, don't use force against others, don't believe that because you have some great grand idea you can force it on other people. That's what private contract societies are for, and etc. It's not that there's no government, it's just that there's no coercive government. Private governance, as Edward Stringham wrote a great book on that, voluntary interactions, private contracts, you as an individual being free, markets flourishing, competition, innovation, productivity, jobs, etc. Happiness through the roof, no more inflation enforced on the masses through legal tender laws, and no more massive monopolies propped up with regulations, taxes at the same time as these patent laws, etc. We could go on about it all day. In fact, I'm writing a book about it. But like I said, it's very important that we understand these issues because freedom is crucial to the very fundamentals of humanity itself. We are born with it. The government cannot give it to us, but they can try and take it away, and we are usually willing sheep to such actions. So we must stop justifying it in any small or large form, because even the smallest tumor will grow. So just remember that, folks, and be free. John, as we close it off, bottom line.
Well, bottom line, Josh, is don't trust the Chinese government. The Chinese government is dangerous. It's a totalitarian regime. We gotta understand that. I see way too many people say like, yeah, the Chinese will take over. Everything will be okay. Don't you take a look at the way they organize their society? It's not a good way to live life, to be so much controlled. It's time for independence. It's time for trying to educate Chinese people about voluntarism and all this stuff that we just talked about. It's time to get the word out to the Chinese people and stop this mania and this idiocracy that is totalitarianism and the mass communism, police, technocratic state that China has built. We can't live our life like that, but that's what China wants the world to do. So be prepared to stand up against that and educate the Chinese population, because we can't live our lives like this. It would be detrimental to the human race.
Be truly honorable, be truly heroic, and stand in front of that tank, folks. You know what to do.
It's time for a Tiananmen Square moment in China again.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for going into this with us, John, and we'll be back at you with much more. We are reporting from 2 different countries, so you can imagine that there's issues, but we will always solve the issues because we love doing this. We love providing you these videos, and we will continue to do that for as long as it takes to overthrow this massive global centralized statist regime.
Let's do it.
Anyway, thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth.
Be the change.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency. Steem, that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets by using promo code WAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.